All right, today we are unpacking a seriously epic and honestly largely hidden history from New Mexico's most dangerous era. We're talking about a time when the edges of the map weren't defined by drawn borders, but by pure survival, ruthless strategy, and a completely unique group of people who essentially acted as a living, breathing human wall. Welcome to The Explainer.
So to really wrap our heads around this story, we have to grasp the incredibly chaotic reality of 18th century New Mexico. For the better part of 100 years, this region was in a constant state of war. And it wasn't just some simple two-sided conflict either. It was this massive, multi-directional clash involving Hispano settlers, Pueblo communities, and powerfully armed nomadic tribes in the plains. We're talking the Comanche, Apache, Navajo, Ute, and Kiowa. It was an era entirely defined by violence, by raiding, and by this constant exchange of human captives, which violently reshaped the entire demographic landscape of the region.
Imagine having to actually deal with this massive problem. Put yourself in the shoes of the Spanish governor who's tasked with holding this turbulent northern frontier together. But of course, here's the catch. The Spanish crown is absolutely not investing much wealth, military support, or materials into this remote part of the world. So you're essentially completely on your own, tasked with DIYing the defense of an empire on a total shoestring budget. Local governors were desperate, literally desperate, to invent some sort of defense strategy that could stabilize the province without draining the royal treasury.
And the sheer geography of this crisis really reveals the true danger. The Spanish and Pueblo populations were basically huddled tightly together, mostly along the Rio Grande. They were completely exposed. They were incredibly vulnerable to the vast open frontier that completely surrounded them. Nomadic raiders had these really easy access points right through the mountain passes, leading directly into these densely populated, resource-rich valleys.
All right, let's get into part one, the buffer town strategy. To execute this tactical shield, Spanish Governor Tomás Vélez Cachapín realized pretty quickly he couldn't just build expensive forts or pay huge armies. Instead, he forced a rapid expansion. Between the 1740s and the 1790s, this entire string of fortified buffer settlements was established at the absolute fringes of the frontier. Their sole purpose? To act as a physical defensive shield for those inner Spanish villas. You've got Belén to the south in the 1740s, then in 1751 Las Trampas is founded, and by 1754 Abiquiu is established. And what do all these specific locations have in common? They were deliberately placed right along high mountain passes and known migration corridors, the exact routes nomadic raiders were frequently using to attack the inner valleys.
So you're probably wondering who exactly was being sent into these incredibly dangerous buffer zones. Well, enter the Genízaros. These were North American Indians of mixed tribal derivation. Many of them were actually former captives, detribalized individuals from Apache, Comanche, Pawnee, or Ute backgrounds, who had been forced into Hispanic households as servants or slaves. Over time, they adopted Spanish surnames, they were baptized with Christian names, and they ended up forming this completely new mixed social caste. But why in the world would anyone volunteer to live directly in the path of constant raiding? Well, for the Genízaros and Mestizos, it was the ultimate trade-off. Under the strict colonial caste system, they were largely landless, completely bound to servitude. But by volunteering to establish these highly dangerous frontier settlements, they could finally escape the domination of the Spanish ruling class. Yes, they had to agree to act as a defensive militia. Yes, they had to live in constant, everyday danger. But in exchange, they gained the one single thing that guaranteed social status and autonomy back then: land ownership. Which brings us to part two, rise of the Genízaros.
Way out there on the fringes, finally away from the suffocating direct control of colonial authorities and the church, these incredibly diverse indigenous people banded together. The colonial archives from this time are actually amazingly meticulous, and documents like a 1733 land petition absolutely prove that they intentionally organized themselves to forge these enduring communities just out of sheer necessity. In that petition, individuals identifying specifically as Genízaro, Apache, and Pawnee united to try and secure land at Sandia Pueblo. Now, while that specific 1733 petition was actually denied, those exact same families would very soon be recruited to form the buffer settlement of Belén. We also see groups like the Tlaxcala from Mexico and Hopi Tewa people stepping up to establish these critical frontier towns.
Moving on to part three, Las Trampas and frontier survival. To really grasp what this survival looked like, let's consider Las Trampas. It was established in 1751 right on the high road specifically to protect inner villages like Santa Cruz from Ute, Comanche, and Apache raids. And the sheer resilience of this place is staggering.
It was initially settled by just 12 families, but the community didn't just survive decades of relentless, brutal attacks, it actually flourished. By 1776, those original 12 families had exploded to 63 families, bringing the town's population up to nearly 300 people.
How exactly did they pull that off? By design. Historic views of these early Genízaro town layouts reveal strict compliance with the laws of the Indies, which was this incredibly comprehensive set of Spanish urban planning codes. Governor Cachapin mandated that these settlements be built as compact, highly defensible plazas. They were initially enclosed by protective walls, and they had these tightly packed adobe houses facing inward to deliberately deflect enemy attacks. It was basically survival by architecture.
Let's look at Part 4, a fortress of faith, San José de Gracia. The ultimate symbol of this incredible frontier survival was the San José de Gracia Church. Construction started around 1760 and finished up by 1776. But here's the thing, this wasn't just a place of worship, it doubled as a literal fortress. Built entirely by the townspeople out of mud and grass, the adobe walls on this thing are a massive 4 to 6 feet thick. They were designed specifically to withstand heavy attacks. The windows were intentionally kept narrow, and the building featured flanking buttresses topped with defensive wooden belfries. Literally, during a Plains Indian raid, the entire town would retreat inside the sanctuary, pull up the ladder to the choir loft, and just wait out the violence.
But because it was built like a dark, heavy bunker, the interior obviously needed light. And that's where we see one of the most brilliant architectural features of the entire era, the transverse clerestory window. It's this completely unique Franciscan invention that you really don't find anywhere else in the world. By raising the transept roof just slightly higher than the nave, they created this horizontal window that is completely invisible from the main floor. The result? This mysterious, hidden source of light that just beautifully floods the sanctuary and the altar, creating an incredible, dramatic contrast inside what is otherwise a dark fortress.
But we have to look beyond just the mud and timber at the human element here. In 1776, Fray Francisco Atanasio Dominguez visited Las Trampas and described the Genízaro and Mestizo population with this absolutely incredible quote. He called them a ragged lot, as festive as they were poor and very merry. Think about that. Despite living in constant danger, despite grinding poverty, they maintained this incredibly vibrant, happy culture. They spoke a fascinating blend of local Spanish mingled with the Tanoan language of the Taos Pueblo, right alongside words borrowed from Comanche, Ute, and Apache dialects. It was a true melting pot.
Finally, Part 5, the Genízaro legacy today.
Because of their super remote mountain locations, these buffer towns actually remained incredibly isolated well into the 20th century, and that isolation is exactly what preserved their unique Spanish and native heritage. But today, the descendants of these settlements are engaged in very complex modern battles. They are actively fighting federal and state agencies like the U.S. Forest Service to reclaim their ancestral common lands and traditional water rights. Remember, these are the exact lands that were originally granted to them by the Spanish crown specifically for acting as that human shield. On top of that, there's a massive growing movement among the younger generations to fight for official indigenous recognition, basically challenging the standard historical classifications to finally honor their mixed Native American ancestry.
Which really leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. We so often hear the history of the frontier told through this really simplistic cowboys and Indians or Spanish versus native lens. But the Genízaros proved that the reality on the ground was deeply, intricately intertwined. When the dust of empires finally settles, how exactly does history define who we are? And perhaps even more importantly for today, who actually gets to claim the land they bled to protect? It's a question these communities are still actively answering right now. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you next time.